Good afternoon. My name is Steve Grigorian. I'm the president and CEO of the Detroit Economic Club. Welcome to today's very special meeting, and I want to emphasize in person. It's so great to see everybody again. I especially want to welcome our DEC members. If you're not a DEC member yet, please allow me 10 seconds to myth bust. There's no application or nomination process. There's no job requirement or salary level. We're just simply looking for people that want to build their networks and hear from thought leaders on our stage. You can sign up at econclub.org. As we get started, I would ask you to please take a moment to silence your cell phones so we do not disturb today's program. And if you've been with us before, you know we always begin our meetings with a pledge and a prayer. So please stand and join me as we honor our country with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And kindly remain standing as my friend here has joined us. This is Deacon Joseph Adams from the Hartford Memorial Baptist Church.
Shall we pray? Almighty God, we ask that you bless this meeting today. We pray that the information shared will help us to understand the mission facing the FBI as they combat the most pressing and national security. We also want to take time to pray for the victims and the refugees of Ukraine. We want to make sure that the Ukraine people know that we are with them. We ask that we take time out each day to give them a prayer so that they know and feel the strength of our love. We also want to take a moment here to pray for the confirmation, that we pray for a fair and honest conversation regarding the confirmation of the next Supreme Court justice. We, as Americans, must demand honest type of individuals to defend and protect our Constitution and the rule of law. We must realize there are a wide range of threats working to divide our nation, to replace our democracy. We must stand together as Americans defending our democratic life. We ask these blessings from you who have created us all. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you, Deacon Adams. You are always terrific to have at the DEC. As you know, we love having high school and college students with us at every one of our meetings. Today is no exception. They're here courtesy of our generous corporate sponsors, and their morning already included a private reception with Director Wray. So I want to take a moment and let you know the students that are with us. Today we've got students from Loyola High School, thanks to Al Rogalski and Warner Norcross Judd. The Warriors from Brother Rice, thanks David Manarino and Key Bank. Melvindale Cardinals, thanks to Peter Quigley, our presiding officer in Kelly Services. Hazel Park High School, Adam Robbins and Accenture. Schoolcraft College, Kim Gorman, and the good folks at Wells Fargo. Please join me in a round of applause as we welcome these students and thank our sponsors. A couple things on your table is our season lineup. You'll see a mix of in-person and virtual programs. Our next in-person will be April 11th, when we'll be hosting Charles Evans, the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago CEO, and he'll be talking about the economy, of course, and inflation and our gas prices. So we look forward to seeing you there, and as always, watch your email. We've got some really fun things heading your way this spring that we haven't been able to announce yet, but will soon. Also on your table is our corporate sponsors, and we make no mistakes, we could not be here, we would not be here if it wasn't for their generosity. So Please take a look at that, patronize those, and we thank those sponsors. Of course, the DEC has an incredible history of speakers that tell the history of our country. Director Wray, March 22nd is a popular date in our 88-year history. You, sir, now join a distinguished list of 17 other speakers who joined us on stage on this day, March 22nd. A few highlights when I say tell the history. 1943, a Soviet Union war correspondent named Maurice Hindus delivered a speech titled What I Saw in Russia. 1965, if you are a ketchup fan, like mustard and ketchup, we hosted the original ketchup CEO, H.J. Heinz. And we also hosted other CEOs on this date, including those from AstraZeneca, Dow, Prudential, and TRW. And today we're pleased to add Director Wray as our 18th speaker on this day in our 88-year history. Congratulations and thanks for being with us. And finally, 2 ways for you to be involved in today's program. We want you to tweet at Debt Economic Club, and also you can submit a question, and those instructions are on your table. You can use your smartphone, and those questions will make their way to a gentleman I'm about to put to work. Peter Quigley is the president and CEO of Kelly Services. He's a board member and great friend to the DEC and a supporter of many, many things in our region. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Peter Quigley. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Steve, and good afternoon, DEC members and guests. It is my distinct honor to introduce today's guest. Christopher Wray became the 8th director of the FBI in August 2017. He began his Department of Justice career in 1997 as an assistant U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. In 2003, Director Wray was nominated by President George W. Bush to serve as Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division. He also served on the President's Corporate Fraud Task Force and supervised the Enron Task Force and other major national and international fraud investigations. Director Wray began his law career in private practice in 1993, and after leaving the Department of Justice in 2005, he returned for another stint in private practice. Director Wray graduated from Yale University and earned his law degree from Yale Law School. Director Wray will open with some remarks, followed by a fireside chat with Steve, and then your audience questions. At this time, I would like to invite the director to the podium for his opening remarks. So please join me in a warm Detroit Economic Club welcome for FBI Director Christopher Wray.
Well, thank you, Peter, for that kind introduction, and to you and the club for the invitation to speak with all of you today. I want to focus this afternoon on partnerships, and in particular, the critical importance of the FBI and the private sector working together to tackle today's threats. But to do that, I want to start in what might seem like a strange place, which is the terrorist attacks of 2001. On that day, after years as a career prosecutor, I was a new appointee at the Department of Justice and spent most of September 11th of 2001 in a packed command center at FBI headquarters. And everyone was trying to help while at the same time struggling to comprehend the horrific reality of what was unfolding. I also remember, in the months that followed, struggling to understand how 19 terrorists had been inside the U.S. plotting a complicated, synchronized attack, and yet government agencies hadn't discovered their plans or been able to stop them. Now, the 9/11 Commission wrote that this stemmed in part from the fact that our intelligence and law enforcement agencies working to counter terrorism weren't sitting down together. And they wrote, and this is a quote, "No one component holds all the relevant information. And without everyone sharing, it wasn't possible to connect the dots. 20 years later, I'm proud of how the law enforcement and intelligence communities responded. We broke down barriers across government and strengthened relationships with law enforcement and intelligence partners, both here and abroad. Through our joint terrorism task forces, the FBI deepened relationships with state and local law enforcement, whose eyes and ears in their communities help us better prevent attacks. Those transformational changes in how we carried out our mission after 9/11 made us stronger and better and made our country safer. But the world and the threat landscape have evolved over the past 20 years. Think about the fact that really, until 2002, not even BlackBerry made a phone that could send email. That back then, most people got online with dial-up, and that no one used Google as a verb. 20 years ago, the FBI was laser-focused on the threats of coordinated, complex physical attacks on things like buildings, shopping malls, and bridges. That threat is still with us, to be clear, but today, we've also got to be vigilant against someone half a world away trying to shut down an entire sector of our society or economy with a piece of code. And I don't use the words shut down metaphorically. As you all know, because many of you work in these industries, we have assets, systems, and networks so vital that losing them could have devastating effects on our national security, on our economic security, our public health and safety. The kind of harm that we would all feel in our everyday lives, not just something we read about in the news. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. The hidden threats our cyber adversaries pose to businesses and institutions, things we often take for granted, and the need to bring private sector partners, all of you, to the fight. We're seeing both profit-minded criminals and nation-state adversaries, and sometimes the two working in a toxic tandem, attacking or threatening those hurt-us-at-home targets. Ransomware groups, because they know that the harder they squeeze, the more they can get paid. We've seen them compromise networks from oil and gas pipelines, hospitals, grade schools, 911 call centers. All of you will likely remember when Colonial Pipeline, one of our nation's largest oil pipelines, got hit by a ransomware attack by the DarkSide hacking group last year. Now, that attack impacted billing systems and IT systems used to monitor pipelines, not the operational systems that actually transport the fuel, but being appropriately cautious, Colonial shut down their pipeline operations until they had been able to confirm that the operational systems were safe. And in the days that followed, in the days during that shutdown, people all across the Southeast panicked, and gas stations all the way up to DC ran completely out of gas. The president had to declare a state of the emergency, and if that's not a hurt you feel at home, I don't know what is. Bottom line is, I can't think of anything ransomware groups would consider off limits, and they're hitting us more and more all the time. In total, between 2019 and 2021, the number of ransomware groups, ransomware complaints, I should say, reported to the FBI increased by 82%. So from 2019 to 2021, an 82% increase. And to just give one example of what those ransomware groups can do, since we opened our investigation into the Russia-based REvil hackers in August of 2019, they've attacked more than 40,000 US-based victims. That's just that one hacking group. And received over $150 million in ransoms through virtual currency systems, Bitcoin and Monero. So to put things in perspective, last year, we saw ransomware incidents against 14 of the US 16 critical infrastructure sectors. That's just ransomware. Like last May, when a ransomware attack on JBS, the world's largest supplier of beef, chicken, and pork, resulted in a complete stoppage at their meat production facilities in the US and Canada and Australia. You may remember prices spiking and meat counters looking awfully sparse. The JBS attack showed that cyber criminals could literally affect our ability to put food on the table. Targeting of those vital networks is in some ways even more dangerous when it's done by nation states. Now, their efforts may look the same as a criminal attack at first. For example, if they're using ransomware, you would see a notice that your data is encrypted. But when a nation state is responsible, there may not be a decryption key out there that's available at any price. Last June, hackers sponsored by the Iranian government compromised a U.S. children's hospital. Let me just say that again, a children's hospital. And in 2017, the Russian military used purported ransomware called NotPetya to hit Ukrainian critical infrastructure with what was supposed to look like a ransomware heist, but was actually designed just to destroy systems. Now, they targeted Ukraine, but they ended up also hitting systems here, throughout Europe, and elsewhere. That attack ended up causing more than $10 billion, that's with a B, dollars in damages. One of the most damaging cyber attacks in the history of cyber attacks, and went global before anyone knew to do anything. And today, of course, with the ongoing conflict raging in Ukraine, we're particularly focused on the destructive cyber threat posed by the Russian intelligence services and cyber criminal groups that they protect and support. We have cyber personnel working closely with the Ukrainians and our other allies abroad, and with the private sector and our partners here. But we've also got to keep a close eye on other nations with a history of threatening us, not just Russia and Iran. We've seen North Korea take destructive cyber action as well. And the Chinese government has hacked more than a dozen U.S. oil and gas pipeline operators, not just stealing their information and holding them and all of us at risk. An awfully dangerous threat from a massive, sophisticated hacking program that is bigger than that of every other major country combined. Beyond ransomware, the cyber threat to intellectual property, to our economic vitality, is also growing. That's compounding the more easily visible economic damage from ransomware attacks. Actors like the Chinese government are working to dominate entire technology sectors by stealing corporate ideas and innovation. They typically do this by simultaneously corrupting your trusted insiders and conducting direct cyber intrusions. To put it simply, whatever makes an industry tick, they target. When they're successful, that results in job losses and devastates local economies, hurting Main Street just as much as Wall Street, and taking food off the table in a whole different way than that JBS Foods attack did. The scale is staggering. To pick just one example, a year ago, hackers with China's MSS, their Ministry of State Security, targeted a vulnerability in the Microsoft Exchange server, software widely used in corporate email systems. And through that, they compromised tens of thousands of computers worldwide and left backdoors so that they could return whenever they wanted. And to give you a sense of how common that kind of threat is, just using cyber means, Chinese government hackers have stolen more of our personal and corporate data than every other nation combined. Fortunately, in each of the cases I just cited, FBI action helped lessen the damage. So that children's hospital, we were able to race there within hours, gave them intelligence and indicators about the attack, and helped them stop it before their systems were locked up and their young patients were harmed. That NotPetya attack, we were able to attribute it to the Russian GRU, and we've been pushing indicators about its activities to industry, foreign partners, and social media companies. Those back doors, the Chinese intelligence services left across America in the exchange hack. We ran an operation in collaboration with Microsoft to slam those back doors shut. And we're disrupting attacks like this every day. Right here in Detroit, our field office has been countering a significant ransomware strain, and they've helped protect a number of businesses by decrypting their networks for them. Important employers around the region, like a rail infrastructure firm, a packaging company, a shipping company. That Colonial ransomware attack, well, it was bad, to be sure, but it could have been so much worse. If the hackers had gained access to the operational systems running the pipeline, we wouldn't have been looking at a 5-day shutdown, but something with potentially much more lasting effect. Thankfully, after they realized what was happening, Colonial called the FBI field office in Atlanta, where they already had an established relationship, and Atlanta knew that our field office in San Francisco had been investigating the dark side group for more than 6 months already. So that meant that within hours of their initial reporting, we were pushing to Colonial relevant technical information along with remediation tactics, techniques, and procedures. And we quickly engaged with DHS's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and the Department of Energy to bring their resources into the fold. And we were well positioned to handle all that coordination so that Colonial, on its end, could focus on their own systems. Our San Francisco office did the forensic examination that helped identify the intrusion vector, a specific compromised company VPN account, which in turn helped Colonial's cybersecurity firm, Mandiant, make sure that that hole was plugged. And it's because Colonial reached out so quickly that we were also able to identify and seize the virtual currency wallet belonging to the hackers. So Colonial got back most of the ransom it had paid, and the bad guys were deprived of most of their ill-gotten gains. And we provided the indicators of compromise that we learned from working with them more broadly to network defenders, sparing countless potential other victims a similar fate. Now, what I want to emphasize today, though, is that we're not doing all this alone. We learned important lessons from 9/11 and the ongoing fight against terrorism, and we've applied those lessons to pretty much everything else we do. Just as we expanded our joint terrorism task forces to many, many more cities after 9/11, we've now set up cyber task forces in all of our 56 field offices across the country. So, if you ever call for help, you're going to get a whole team with specialized expertise to help you and with jurisdiction to go after any cyber bad actor. That's at every FBI field office. The biggest difference between the model we built to fight terrorism and the way we battle cyber threats, though, is the importance of the private sector. Private networks, whether they belong to a pipeline operator, some other kind of victim, an internet service provider, are most often the places we do battle, are most often the places where we confront our adversaries. So we share information with the private sector whenever we can through things like one-on-one outreach, through cyber threat bulletins, and through our many partnerships, like with the 627 Fortune 1000 companies who belong to DSAC, which is our Domestic Security Alliance Council, or the more than 70,000 professionals in our InfraGuard program, all of whom are focused on protecting U.S. critical infrastructure. We may not always be able to tell you how we know what we know, but we can almost invariably get you what you need to protect yourself. But we also need what the private sector sees to protect companies, schools, universities of all kinds. If American businesses don't report attacks and intrusions, we won't know about most of them, which means we then can't help you recover, and we don't know how to stop the next attack, whether that's against you or a new attack against one of your partners. So we like to say that the best way to protect one business is to hear from others, and the best way to protect others is to hear from that one. Fortunately, over the past few years, we've been getting thousands of intrusion reports from companies annually, and that sharing kicks off what I would call sort of a virtuous cycle. So we use it to develop information about who the adversary is, what they're doing, where, why, how, taking pains to protect the information we get from companies, much like we protect the information carefully that we get from our sources, from our investigations, or from NSA, or from foreign partners, et cetera. And we pass what we develop to partners here and abroad, our fellow U.S. and foreign intel services, foreign law enforcement, providers like Microsoft, CISA, sector risk management agencies. Those partners can then in turn use what we've given to provide us with more information, which feeds our global investigations, which helped us discover more malicious infrastructure that we can target ourselves, helps us alert more private sector partners to more disruption and arrest opportunities, which then leads us to more useful information to pass back to that first company that reported to better remediate and protect itself, and maybe find more technical information it can then share back with us and our partners, take further steps, and so on. It's why we've deployed all across the country and in nearly 80 countries around the world. What partnerships let us do is hit our adversaries at every point, from the victims' networks back all the way to the hackers' own computers. Because when it comes to the FBI cyber strategy, we know that just trying to stand in the goal and block shots isn't going to get it done. We're disrupting three things: the actors, their infrastructure, and their money. And we have the most durable impact when we work together with all of our partners to go after all three at the same time. So going after the actors, we work with like-minded countries to identify who's responsible for the most damaging ransomware schemes and take them out of the game. We cast a wide net, not just going after the ransomware group's administrators and affiliates, but also folks like their money launderers, their malware developers, their bulletproof hosting providers, and others that enable them. And that may mean arresting and extraditing them back to the U.S. to face justice, or it may mean prosecution by a foreign partner, or finding other ways with our intelligence community partners to pressure and disrupt them. Simultaneously, taking down cyber criminals' technical infrastructure, their servers, their domains, their botnets, their malware, all that disrupts their operations. Just last year, the FBI led an international operation that seized control of a botnet called Emotet, which consisted of tens of thousands of computers that were infected, used in a range of cyber criminal schemes, including some major ransomware strains, and going after their money. When we seize virtual wallets and return stolen funds, that not only helps the victims, of course, but it takes resources away from the bad guys, helping to prevent future criminal operations. But like I said, the FBI and the government as a whole needs your help to make these operations work. Together, we can protect your companies and our critical infrastructure and shut down malicious activities before they hurt anyone else. So with that in mind, I'll ask the business leaders listening today to develop a formal cyber incident response plan, if you haven't already, and include the contact information for your local FBI field office somewhere in that plan. For our part, I and the leaders in all 56 FBI field offices have spent a huge amount of time reaching out to critical partners in the private sector, like those of you here, because to me, success looks like strong relationships between all of you and your local FBI field offices, whether it's here in Detroit or elsewhere, so that in the unfortunate event of an intrusion, you'll already have a relationship with the guy or gal who can be on your doorstep in hours to help you get your systems, information, and resources back. So looking forward to continuing our conversation this afternoon, and more importantly, for the work that we'll do together going forward. Thank you.
Need a sip of water? You good?
I'm good.
Director, thank you so much for, again, traveling to Detroit and for your remarks. But before we dig into stuff, let's establish something. I know in order for me to be on stage this close to you, You had to do a background check on me, so go ahead and tell them how squeaky clean my background is.
Well, as you know, we don't like to talk about ongoing investigations, but no. But no, I think you can read a lot into the fact that we're sitting here together.
Whew, good. Your remarks referenced a lot about cyber threats. It really wasn't a warm, fuzzy feeling, for sure, but when I was sitting there, I thought, how in the world do you handle the enormous volume of activity?
So I think there are a few things, because you're right about the volume, whether it's the attack surface, whether it's the kinds of actors that are out there, whether it's the kind of methods they use. The first thing I would point to is intelligence. Intelligence-driven operations that allows us to prioritize, allows us to be more efficient, allows us to maximize impact on the adversary. So that's a big part of it. The second is the theme of my talk, which is partnership. I think cyber is the ultimate team sport. And just like in the private sector, when you're evaluating a good merger and you're looking for synergies, it's much the same. We're trying to look for ways to have our two, the FBI's two, together with our partners two, to equal more than 4, to equal 5 or 6 or 7 to really maximize impact. And that's, I think, what we're doing. That's why these model cyber squads that I described out in all of our field offices are an important part of making sure that we can get out there quickly and try to maximize impact.
Let's talk about Russia. I know it's on everybody's mind, and yesterday we saw President Biden warn us of a strong possibility of Russian cyber attacks. So what is the FBI's role in protecting the U.S. and our allies from these cyber threats?
So I guess the first thing I would say is that we are, of course, concerned about the possibility, as the President said, of the Russians, whether it's their intelligence services or cyber criminal groups working with them, targeting U.S. critical infrastructure either in retaliation for our sanctions or for some other means. And we are keenly focused on it. For several months now, we've been working at kind of a heightened tempo. We have a 24/7 cyber command post. We've been pushing out intelligence, hundreds of reports to various affected or potentially affected businesses. We have agents poised to run out to, as I said earlier, within an hour or so, pretty much anywhere in the country to see if some abnormal cyber activity may be matching up with something we know about the Russians. I should say that the reason we're concerned about it is not just based on our long-standing understanding of how the Russians operate, but it's actually the product of specific investigative work and surveillance work that we've been doing all together. And the thing I would point to there is that most cyber attacks don't just happen in an instant. There's activity that leads up to it. There's scanning and researching of victims, scanning for vulnerabilities in systems. There's developing access to those systems. So there's a whole range of preparatory work, which is what we've been seeing. And so we have been engaged with certain companies and industries specifically to try to help them button things down to make it harder for those attacks to go all the way to the next level.
From Europe to very local here in Michigan, as you know, we're home to major autos, the auto industry, suppliers, great research universities, banks, energy companies. What does that threat landscape look like for those companies?
Well, there's two pieces of it. I talked a lot about ransomware, and of course ransomware commands a lot of everybody's attention in the news because in some ways it's the thing that can most obviously paralyze a business. And certainly, as I've said, we've seen an uptick in ransomware. But sometimes I worry that that immediate threat, which is hard to ignore, distracts us from, in some ways, the bigger threat long-term to businesses like the ones you're talking about, which is the theft of their innovation, of their trade secrets, of their intellectual property. And that threat is real. It's far more pervasive than I think a lot of businesses fully appreciate. And that's a place where, in particular, I think we need to build more and more partnership with the private sector because the private sector is the victim. The private sector knows which pieces of information are their crown jewels, what they're most worried about getting into the hands of a competitor. And I should say, by the way, in the case of China, which is the biggest culprit in this space, they're stealing corporate information from U.S. businesses and putting it in the hands of Chinese competitors. So we actually have their intelligence services stealing information from U.S. businesses to help Chinese businesses. And that is something that I think can't be overlooked.
Wow. All right, from Michigan to the entire U.S., I want to talk about elections. And we've got certainly midterms coming up this fall, 2022. What role does the FBI play in ensuring our country continues to hold free and fair elections?
So, of course, it's, again, a team sport, and I would say that it's important to put this caveat up front, which is, of course, in our system, the states have the principal responsibility for administering our elections. But the FBI does have an important role to play along with its partners. I'd kind of put it in three categories. The first is we protect the right to vote, access, which means we're investigating and pursuing election crimes, whether they be voter fraud or ballot fraud on the one hand, or voter access, voter suppression on the other side. That's one big piece. We also protect the manner in which we vote. So that is against cyber threats to our election infrastructure, which is something that we have to be concerned about. And other kinds of threats to the manner in which we vote. We and the Department of Justice have stood up a task force focused on physical threats, threats of violence to election workers. And we've recently had some notable arrests in that category. So that's the second. And I guess the third would be protecting our democracy from foreign malign influence. Different ways in which some of these same nation states I was talking about are attempting to undermine our democracy through cyber means, through other forms of malign influence. So those would probably be the big ways in which we participate.
I know this next question might evoke emotions from you because you really care about this. Tragically, we've seen a growing number of law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty in recent years. Why do we see this trend?
Well, as much as this pains me, I'm really glad you asked about it, because I don't think this topic gets the attention it demands, which is that the threat of violence, the violence against law enforcement, has reached almost epic proportions. Last year, we had 73 law enforcement officers feloniously killed, as in murdered, in the line of duty last year. Put that in context, that's about 1 every 5 days. That is the highest number since 2001, since the year of September 11th. So that's the highest number in 20 years. And we're off to a hell of an ominous start in 2022. We have 11 officers already killed, and that doesn't count, again, the ones that die in vehicle pursuits, for example, or COVID, or any of the other ways, or all those officers who are injured in a way that changes their lives forever and their families' lives forever, but don't count into that number. And I think as to why it happens, I think the violent crime spike in this country is real, and of course that has an effect. We also need to make sure, when I talk to chiefs and sheriffs all over the country, which I do every week, they're worried about recruiting, retention, morale. So we need to make sure that law enforcement in this country has the resources, the training, the equipment, and the support from the community that they deserve. If you stop and think about it, there are not that many people that would sacrifice their lives for a total stranger. Your immediate family, maybe, but for a total stranger, you got to think about what kind of person is hardwired that way. And then, while you're thinking about that, think about what it takes to do that every single day for an entire career. So when I say these people don't grow on trees, that's probably an understatement. And I feel this personally. We lost 3 of our own last year. And one of the things that I committed to doing when I started as director, I decided I was going to call personally the chief or sheriff of any department who loses an officer like that in the line of duty to convey personally my condolences and my support on behalf of the FBI. And I have a photograph of the fallen officer and information about their spouse, their kids, the ages of their kids, and how it happened, how long they served. And in my time as director, I've made well over 200 of those phone calls. So it is a real issue, and we need to communicate to the men and women of law enforcement that we have their backs.
Well, thank you for making those phone calls. Those couldn't be easy. So, are you ready for some audience questions?
Let's do it.
Let's bring Peter back up.
Thank you. I promised Steve we'd be out of here on time. As you know, he's a very timely guy. So we won't get to all the questions. Thank you for submitting them. So I'll try to consolidate some around themes, Director Wray. One of them is around digital currency and crypto and how that has potentially complicated your team's work and how it potentially factors into things like ransomware.
Well, it's a good question. We are dealing with virtual currency in almost, not just in ransomware, where it is the means of payment of choice, but also, frankly, in all kinds of other criminal and increasingly nation-state activity as well. And it is, at first blush, harder to trace and follow the money, which is, of course, what we do, is follow the money. I will say we have developed a lot more expertise in terms of tools and training and so forth than I think a lot of people appreciate. So people who think that they'll be able to hide successfully with cryptocurrency sometimes have a rude awakening, and that's just fine with me. But constantly we're seeing new variants, and some of these foreign forms of it make it more and more challenging for us to pursue. So we got to keep pushing to make sure we stay ahead of the game.
Thank you. This next question, it feels like we've seen an increase in racially motivated violent extremism and hate crimes in recent years. Can you talk about what you're seeing at the FBI? Is that representative of the domestic terrorism evolution, and what can be done to combat it?
So in terms of what we see in terms of the pattern or the trend, I would say certainly racially motivated violent extremism has been responsible for the most lethal attacks over the last several years, certainly. But we're also seeing a significant uptick in what I would call anti-government, anti-authority violent extremism, which is everything from militia violence to anarchist violence. And we're also seeing, and we shouldn't forget because it is a real phenomenon that is almost as pervasive, we see homegrown violent extremism, which is jihadist, like think ISIS-inspired violent extremism. People here inspired online. And what all these threats have in common is typically lone actors or maybe one or two people working together, radicalized online, pursuing what we would call soft targets, which is basically just intelligence community speak for everyday people living their everyday lives and using crude, easily accessible weapons. Think a gun, a knife, a car, as opposed to some spectacular attack. And that is exponentially more challenging in some ways because, I was earlier using the expression of connecting the dots. Well, the kind of attack I'm talking about here, whether it's on the domestic violent extremism side or the jihadist-inspired homegrown violent extremist side, there are not a lot of dots out there, which means it's even more challenging for all of us in law enforcement to spot it. I don't have to tell anybody here how hard it would be to anticipate somebody who's sitting at home and just decides one day to get up and drive their car through a pedestrian walkway. So what do we do about it? Well, that's where the eyes and ears of the community become so important, not just our state and local partners on the Joint Terrorism Task Forces, but we need everybody out in the community. If they, you hear that expression, if you see something, say something. Most people think of that unattended backpack in the Greyhound bus terminal, and we certainly want people to call with that too. But here we're talking about if you see something about somebody, whether physically or online, we want those tips being called in, because that could be the dot that we needed to connect.
So your comments, Director Wray, about partnership obviously struck a chord, because there's a number of, I would say, practical questions about what do you say to a CEO who gets hit with ransomware? And you mentioned developing a relationship with the field office. Are there other things, or is that something that you would suggest as a first step?
Well, certainly I would start with that, and I say this with the perspective of somebody who, as you said in your introduction, has been on both sides of the table. I mean, I've represented companies in these situations and dealt with their boards and their CEOs and their general counsels. So I know these are hard business decisions. The relationship up front is important, right, because we're all more likely to make the key phone call if you feel comfortable beforehand. You know, the old saying about the best time to patch the roof is when the sun is shining. So there's that concept. But I think the second thing is, well, we strongly, strongly discourage paying the ransom, but the most important thing, whether you pay it or not, is to make sure you're quickly reaching out to the local FBI field office. You think about ransomware, think about the more physical analogy that you see in the movies all the time of a kidnapping, of an actual in-person kidnapping. And you see the parent, you know, there with the FBI agent with the headset on, listening to the phone call with the kidnapper. We need the cyber equivalent of that, because that's what enables us to do things like what we did in Colonial, which is get the money back. And what I would say to a CEO who's considering paying the ransom is, I'd be careful about that. For one thing, there's no guarantee that the people you're paying are actually going to decrypt your system in the first place. Remember, these are not exactly people of honor you're dealing with. The second thing I would say is there's no guarantee they're not going to do something else with your data, even if they give you the decryption key. More and more we're seeing ransomware actors then sell your information to others or otherwise misuse it. So you could get hit with a double or triple whammy. But the last thing, of course, is if we're going to make a real dent on ransomware, we have to make sure we're not pouring more gasoline on the fire. And every time people pay the ransom, it's pouring more gasoline on the fire.
Yeah, it's great advice. Thank you. Detroit Economic Club tradition of a lightning round is about 30 seconds away, so you feel free to limit the response to this question to 30 seconds. January 6th, I know you can't get into specifics because of ongoing litigation, but is there got a number of questions, any update on investigations?
Well, as you said, there's not a whole lot I can say because it's ongoing, and there's a lot of very strong-minded federal judges who care deeply about commenting on pending prosecutions. But we've made over 750 arrests, and we're far from done. The investigation's very much ongoing, and there'll be more to come.
Thank you. Appreciate your candor. Okay, lightning round, and feel free to deflect any question that you... your best sport?
Well, I was a rower in college. I was a Division I athlete, so that was a big part of my life. That's probably the thing I would point to. Yeah.
Well, we're in Detroit. Your first car?
Well, my first car was something my parents gave my wife and me when we were newlyweds, which was an old beat-up Subaru that was stick shift, that had no AC. And those of you who've ever watched the Flintstones, it felt like one of those things where your feet are underneath the bottom.
Yeah, well, I think we can all relate to beat up and stick shift. So, a favorite vacation spot?
Well, I have many, but one I would point to is the Adirondacks in upstate New York, especially the High Peak region. It's beautiful. If you haven't gone, I strongly recommend it.
What did you want to be when you were growing up?
Well, from until I was about third grade, I was convinced I was going to be an NHL player.
Oh. You're in Hockey Town, too.
I realize I'm in Hockey Town here. That didn't last past third grade, but I was convinced when I was age 9 that was my future. Yeah.
I don't know that you have much time for this, but the last book you read?
I usually am reading several books at once. I'm in the process of rereading one of my favorite books, Good to Great. I'm also reading a book by Admiral Stavridis called Sailing True North. But then I also read, some of you may be familiar with the Mitch Rapp character of Vince Flynn's book, a very different kind of reading. those are some of the things I'm reading right now.
What's something about you that most people would be surprised to know?
Well, here's one. When I was in high school, I was actually a bassist, and I was in a band with a number of my high school friends, and we had an agent, and we were going to be touring and everything else, but then life intervened, but it was a lot of fun.
Well, we're glad you weren't so good. And last question, advice to your 25-year-old self?
Well, I would say treat everyone with decency and respect. Put your head down, work hard, embrace the grind, do the right thing in the right way. Don't be afraid of a challenge or adversity, because those are often opportunity. And then I think have faith that if you do all those things consistently, I think you'd be surprised how many good things will come to pass. Sometimes disappointments, setbacks actually turned out to be some of the best things that ever happened to you, and other things come to pass instead. So stay the course.
Yeah, timeless advice for the students in the room, but I think, frankly, for all of us. So, Director Wray, thank you for your candor, for your comments. I'm going to turn it back to Steve for a close.
How about a round of applause for Director Wray? You are a good man. Thank you for joining us. Let us know if we can be helpful in Detroit, and maybe next time you come back, you'll bring your bass with you. Right? So, Peter
Thanks.
Quigley, thanks for your time and talent. You did a terrific job. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope to see you on April 11th when we will be hosting Charlie Evans from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Tell your friends and colleagues, join the DEC. We're cool. We make it happen. So, on time, every time, this meeting of the Detroit Economic Club is adjourned.
Thank you.